Hello, today is May 10th, 2016, and this is Athens Speakout. Our title is the results of the West Virginia primary race for President of the United States and the delegate race in the Republican and Democratic primaries. My name is David DeWitt. I'm the Associate Editor of the Athens News. My guest is Robert Whaley, a retired historian from Ohio University, and this is Athens Speakout number 365. I believe you want to begin today with a statement about the significance of May 4th.
Yes, that's a famous holiday of some kind. It has not yet got a name. But last week, the May 4th, was a day of memory. It was already an anniversary in Kent State, Ohio, in May 4th, 1970. And May 4th, 1970 was a day of killings in Kent State when Governor Rhodes was in charge of Ohio National Guard. And at that time, there were huge anti-war demonstrators in both Kent and Ohio University, and in 4,000 other universities throughout the United States, denouncing Nixon's unwinnable war in Indochina. So what do we call it? Is it a day of memory? Is it a day of celebration? Is it a day of tragedy? In any case, the Kent University community has been in dispute about later celebrations. There's not yet a recognized day in the state of Ohio commemorating those martyrs, because 4 kids were shot down, and there were 2,000 other universities that closed for at least a day, and Ohio University, being a sister university, closed down for a week.
Yes.
And we lost a quarter. Okay.
It was an interesting atmosphere. I've just seen the pictures. There was a great exhibit at the Athens County Historical Museum showing the pictures of what the campus looked like during those weeks that followed the Kent State shootings, and
right.
it was kind of eerie because you saw these recognizable landmarks like Alumni Gateway and
right.
Class Gateway,
right.
but they were lined with soldiers.
That's right.
With bayonets on their rifles.
Right.
And you could see the demonstration and tear gas being thrown and stuff. It was an eerie
Now,
exhibit.
A week before that, I was out on Memorial Auditorium steps. Got there about 10 o'clock in the morning, and we went until about 11 at night. Now, I usually go home at night because students warn me. Mm-hmm. So this is when students get rowdy. So about 7 o'clock, I had finished my speaking, but I was one of the agitators denouncing Richard Nixon's illegal, immoral war. I was at what the Senate would call Senate doves, you see. Mm-hmm. And Eugene McCarthy and Robert Kennedy and Senator Mansfield from Montana and William J. Fulbright from Arkansas, there were about 17 or 18 doves in the Senate.
George
McGovern, right. And they were denouncing the war. And of course the students were all in sympathy because they were draft bait.
Right.
And they had a choice of going in the army, fleeing to Canada or Sweden, or going to jail. They had a difficult time.
That's a
or else they could make fake 4F. They got doctors.
Oh, okay.
Some of the rich got doctors. Say, well, this guy is flat-feet.
Medical excuses.
Yeah, medical excuses.
I believe the presumptive Republican nominee for president.
Yeah.
That's what he did.
So it was a corrupt system. And anyway, in any case,
it's a fascinating. There's some good documentaries about that on YouTube. I suggest that people check out. There's a lot more to the story than you might think, and the events leading up
Right.
to that, and just the general atmosphere on the Kent State campus and in Kent, Ohio at the time.
Yeah.
And then James Rhodes, the Ohio's longest-serving governor, who the Appalachian Highway is named after now.
Yeah, but he didn't get reelected. He supported Nixon, and then his next election.
That's when,
Because
that's when
they never discovered who fired the shot.
Right.
The commander of the National Guard said, "I didn't order fire."
Right.
Or was it just a soldier? Or was it a CIA agent who told the soldier, "You fire"?
Yeah.
And the other National
Well,
Guard
you
said,
go
"Well, I
down
just
that
heard
rabbit
firing, and I just started firing."
And that's what apparently
then
that's
why
what a
did
lot
they-
of people said.
Yeah, why did they have loaded rifles? That was
Right.
another question.
And it seems, preposterous that you would bring loaded rifles to
And
a
then there
college
was a
campus.
famous novelist by the name of James Michener. Have you ever heard of him?
I don't believe so.
Well, he was a bestseller. He wrote travel novels. Well, he wrote a bestseller on the Kent State tragedy. I don't know if they called it a tragedy or the massacre, but that's the title of his novel, the Kent State. And that was a bestseller for 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a thick book like that. He'd written other novels. And Michener, Minchner. Well, after he wrote that, the TV pundits began to get him off the bestseller list.
Oh.
I don't think he ever did another novel, but this was about his 10th novel.
Yeah.
Anyway, to get back to the aftermath, Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, who were president from 1976 to 88, two presidents, campaigned on amnesty, and they got the American public opinion to forget there ever was a Vietnam War and that we ever had any debate about that. And they wanted to talk about new issues, and the Vietnam War did trickle down to an end under the Nixon administration through the clever diplomacy of Richard Nixon. So anyway, Kent State was a kind of a local holiday, and there was one of those guys who was wounded by the name of Dean Taylor, and he lost his power of his legs, and he came down to
I know. I've
he
heard of
came
that
down
guy.
to Ohio University, and he ran on a sympathy vote, and he became the county commissioner for about 10 years. And then all of the left-wing people in Athens voted for a sympathy vote, give him a job. And then he was down here about 10 years, and then he retired. But then he used to come back about every year to visit. So I guess I recalled meeting him for about 20 years, off and on.
Don't forget to give credit to Neil Young for his
Well,
song.
Four Dead in Ohio. Yeah.
Four Dead in Ohio.
Okay, let's explain that to me. I don't know much about music.
Neil Young is a pretty renowned rock star, Canadian rock star, who singer-songwriter, and he wrote a famous song called "Four Dead in Ohio."
Oh, I see.
And it really brought,
Well,
a lot
before
more
that, we
attention to
had
that.
Joan Baez and
all sorts
Jane
of
Fonda
yeah.
and the
They were
Beatles.
contemporaries.
Yeah,
They
the Beatles used to sing about the war in general. And I lived in Spain for a year, and everybody, all the students in Spain knew all about Kent State. And I'd say, I'm from Ohio University, and I'd say, yeah, I know Ohio University. They all thought it was Ohio State.
Yeah.
I had to explain there was a little difference. But my card was a seller. And then I said, well, have you ever heard of Kent State? Oh, yes, okay. So I could talk about it.
Yeah, sure.
So I was kind of a popular. Well, anyway, Dean Taylor gradually went off the radar screen in Athens, Ohio. And Jimmy Carter was a believing Christian, and he was the best Christian president we've had. And politics and religion will always be tied together. And it's doubtful that many Democrats or Republicans in this present election know much about the connection between religion and politics. So anyway,
Religion is politics.
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. The way I
That
would.
means historically. I mean, I guess the only reason I say that is because I've been reading about the Borgias lately.
Oh, Caesar Borgia. Well, that's way back in
yeah,
1500.
yeah, I know, but
Yeah,
I've just got it on my brain
Well,
how
okay.
political the
All right.
Roman Catholic Church was at
All
that
right,
time.
okay. Well, we can say this, that the Roman Catholic Church had a monopoly on all learning in Western Europe from 400 AD to 1300. Now, in 1300, we have a new form of Christianity called the Renaissance. And the Renaissance reinterpreted the medieval Dark Age religion. In other words, the Roman Catholic Church had two philosophers. St. Augustine,
Right.
who lived in 410, and the other one was St. Thomas Aquinas. Now, when the Protestants rebelled, that is Luther and Calvin, they still adhered to St. Augustine. And he developed the idea of the just war. It's okay to go to war if you have a just cause. But St. Thomas Aquinas was denounced as scholastic, a kind of a phony interpretation of Christianity. Okay. So the official stand of the Roman Catholic Church was that the Pope is the vicar of Christ.
Right.
He stands in for Christ, and that was believed by the Roman Catholic Church without any doubt.
Right.
But the Greek Orthodox had split off. And originally there was one holy, not Roman, but one holy Catholic Orthodox Church. Well, in 1054, Rome and Constantinople split. And the Patriarch of Constantinople excommunicated the Pope in Rome. And the Patriarch is the same as Father, and the Pope is the same as Father. They all accepted the idea of the Father of the people.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And Rome excommunicated and they never got back together. But theologically, Rome calls Orthodoxy a schismatic church. That is, their argument is over church government. Their argument is who is the head of the church.
Right.
Now, the Protestants were different. They were called heretics. And they were going to put Martin Luther on the stake and burn him for heresy. But meanwhile, the Renaissance had allowed the printing of the Bible so that
Right.
millions of people were now, not millions, but let's say 100,000 people were reading
Yeah,
the Bible.
people could actually read it because before then it was only in Latin and it could only be interpreted through the
You got it,
priests.
right.
And yeah,
So
and that was very controversial.
that was that time, yeah.
Yeah.
So Erasmus is key. Erasmus was a Dutch scholar. He was a Swiss scholar. He lived in Basel, and he also had a chair in Rotterdam. Now, Erasmus had 2 feet, 1 foot in the Renaissance and the other foot in the Reformation.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So officially, he still belonged to the Church of Rome.
So he is key because he really straddled both sides of
That's
that
right.
equation at the key time.
But he translated the Vulgate version of the Bible, the Latin version, into the original Greek. And he said the Vulgate's got lots of mistakes in it.
Oh,
So then when Luther and Calvin come along,
Right.
and Henry VIII come along, they all go back to the Greek New Testament and translate that Bible into English, into German, into French, into Romanian, and all the other languages.
right.
What year was that, Robert?
What year was what? Erasmus or Luther?
Yes, yes.
Well, Erasmus died, I think, in 1536.
Yeah, and that was around the time of Luther.
That's
too,
right. That's right.
Yeah.
Erasmus started his translation in 1516, and then the 95 Theses came out in 1517. Then you had religious wars.
Right.
So Erasmus, in his old age, was moving closer and closer to the Protestants, but he didn't quite get there.
I see.
He died just the time that Calvin finished his great work called The Institutes of the Christian Religion.
Right, Calvin.
So Erasmus died the same
Erasmus,
year.
Calvinist.
But before that, he wrote A Praise of Folly, which was an anti-clerical book. And he was talking about the corruption in Rome and these priests who had sex intercourse. They weren't obeying the
Such as the Borgias.
Yeah, such as the Borgias.
Well, sorry about the digression.
Yeah, well, anyway, that's the importance of religion. Well, anyway, to get back to World War I and World War II in Vietnam, World War I was a great tragedy for the Christian community because you had the Church of England in England. You had the Roman Catholic Church in France, but it was a very weak, lukewarm form of Catholicism. Because the French Revolution of 1789 and the French Revolution of 1830 and the Revolution of 1848 and the Revolution of 1870 had downplayed the importance of Catholicism. So half the French were kind of atheists or agnostics or non-believers or lukewarm believers.
Yeah. It's a far stretch from where they were just a couple centuries before. They were very Catholic.
Yeah, 15, yeah, okay.
So by the...
Robert, I know religion took off after the invention of the printing press. What year was that?
Well, the press was actually in 1453. That's Gutenberg. Gutenberg invented the press.
Right.
Yeah.
With the printing press.
And he printed a Vulgate Bible.
So that was in the Latin.
That was in the Latin. But then that Vulgate Bible was replaced by Erasmus, and then
That's when the translation.
then the English began. The English had a Geneva Bible, which was translated in Geneva by the Calvinists. Then they came out with the King James Version. And that became the official Protestant Bible. But you could still get an English Bible, which was based on the French. The DeWitt Bible, it was written in French based on the Vulgate. So the loyal Roman Catholics in England could buy an English Bible called the DeWitt Bible, published in France. Because officially, the kings of France still remained Catholic. Okay?
Right.
Any question on that? No. Well, anyway, in the First World War, you had lukewarm Catholicism in France. You had relatively loyal Catholicism in Austria. That was the big Catholic Habsburg family.
Right, the Habsburg.
But it was getting more liberal. It was beginning to become more secularized and giving toleration to the Protestants and so forth. But the most dogmatic and backward of the sects was the Russian Orthodox Church. The Russian Orthodox Church was 200 years behind. So here are four so-called Christian powers: the Germans, the French, the Germans, which had the Lutheran Church, 1/3, and two-thirds of the Germans, 2/3 of the German states. They had 28 German states. So 2/3 of the states were Protestant in Berlin. And then the southern Germany, down in Bavaria and Baden, were Catholic states, and they had their autonomous state religions. That's how the Germans worked. And anyway, so anyway, religion got downplayed, and nationalism took over. Nationalism, imperialism, and monarchy became the reason for the war. And all of the Christian churches failed for not stopping the war and let it go on for 4 years.
Right.
So religion comes out of there in bad shape. And a lot of people then became agnostics or atheists or non-believers, and the faith in dogmatic, old-fashioned Christianity is getting weaker and weaker.
That was part of the lost generation.
Part of the lost generation. And it never really recovered, but there have been little revivals. Now you might say that Jimmy Carter was a small revival. It lasted for 4 years.
Yeah.
And Ronald Reagan was a small revival.
Well, and and that's part of the rise of the religious right, which became a, political force.
Yeah, well, Ronald Reagan,
that still reverberates.
yeah,
But
Ronald
it
Reagan,
was a coalition that he was able to put together.
yeah, well, Ronald Reagan was a very tolerant liberal Christian.
Right. So he went to Eureka College.
Yeah, it was an optimistic interpretation of Calvinism.
Mm-hmm.
The old-fashioned Calvinist was pessimistic.
Right, because Calvinists were considered, I mean, the whole term Calvinist is considered radical in a certain way, or zealotous, I guess.
Well, the original Calvin said that God is so powerful he can determine who's going to go to heaven and hell.
Mm-hmm.
That's the original Calvinism. Predetermination.
Right.
Now, the Methodists and the Catholics and the Episcopalians and most other non-Calvinist sects believe in free will.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a famous novel called Moby Dick.
Herman Melville.
It's the most important novel in English literature.
Yeah, I agree.
And he takes up this question of free will versus determinism. And he has a beautiful metaphor. He said the weavers, they used to have two strings, the woof and the wharf. Mm-hmm. Well, he says all of the strings that go this way are deterministic, and all of the strings that go that way are free will.
Right.
So the Bible actually says both.
Right.
The Bible actually says it's God's will. There are other places the Bible says, change your behavior, repent for your sins, and you will be saved. It says both things.
Steinbeck, right. Steinbeck kind of took up that hairy, proposition in East of Eden.
Yeah.
And he hinged it on the term "thou mayest."
Yeah.
And it was you have to read the book to get the full picture, but his whole point was thou mayest, you may choose.
Right. Right.
So, but it also deals with the same issue of predeterminism versus free will.
Well, in any case, to get back to our main theme, World War II was a further weakening of religion. Mm-hmm. Because...
Timshell is the word.
In other words, Franklin Roosevelt was a lukewarm Episcopalian, right? And
Franklin Roosevelt?
Yeah, Franklin Roosevelt. And Winston Churchill was a lukewarm Church of England. Mm-hmm. In other words,
which would be Anglican?
That's the same as Anglican.
Right, okay.
And so they were not in the business of making proselytation and conversion.
Right.
See, the hard-shell Baptists down in Texas,
oh, they're all about
they
proselytation.
think,
and
yeah,
conversion.
that's Cruz.
Yeah.
You got to go out and convert people.
Everyone else has to believe what I believe.
Yeah. And Cruz shot himself in the foot.
Oh, of course.
A majority of the people in New York, especially New York, thought that
by
Cruz was
talking about
crazy.
the New York and then he didn't do himself any favors talking about New York, talking disparagingly about New York values. He alienated a lot of people with that talk, and I suppose it was good at the time because he was in his what I call his tent revivalist mode, where he was trying to appeal to that certain Baptist sect, but on a broader scale, you just alienate people with that.
Right. Well, both Lyndon Johnson, and this is something that people don't understand. Both Lyndon Johnson and Ronald Reagan belonged to a church called the Church of the Disciples of Christ. Mm-hmm. And that's an offshoot of Calvinism. But it isn't very dogmatic.
Okay.
It's very optimistic.
I see.
And Ronald Reagan's mother was not discriminating against blacks. His father was an alcoholic, so he was very tolerant to sin. Mm-hmm. And he had no problem with blacks. When he goes to Hollywood, he has no problem with Jews. Mm-hmm. So Ronald Reagan was very tolerant of all of the religions, and he was married twice. He got divorced. So
divorce is obviously on the table.
Right. So he got converted to anti-communism as a pseudo-religion.
Right, during his stint.
And gradually the Christianity gets
the 50s.
lighter and lighter and lighter, and it becomes anti-communist, okay?
The godless communists.
Yeah, but Ronald Reagan pulls a fast one. I voted against Ronald Reagan in 2000 and in 1980 because I thought he really believed, that abortion was the major sin and all of that.
Well, I think that was just shrewd political.
That was politics.
Yeah.
That was he was just looking for votes.
Yeah.
But the big change was 1986-87, when Ronald Reagan, the great hawk, who was going to fight Star Wars, suddenly cashes in the trips, says, okay, we're going to negotiate with Gorbachev, we're going to disarm.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, the nuclear disarm.
Right, right. So Ronald Reagan, and I think Nancy was a part
treaties.
of Nancy was part of it.
Oh, always she was.
And the other part were the Bechtel brothers. The
Bechtel Corporation. Yeah.
Caspar Weinberger and
The
George
Department
Shultz
of Defense.
were educated in Harvard and so forth, and they
Secretary
were
of State,
were very agnostic and non-church-going people. And they
Sure.
said, negotiate. And Ronald Reagan. Now the problem today is that Cruz and Trump and all of these people say Ronald Reagan is the model, but it's the wrong Ronald Reagan.
It's not the Ronald Reagan that existed in reality.
Yeah,
though.
right. It's
the Saint Reagan that the Republican
Yeah.
Party has held up and have formed to fit their ideal.
Right.
30 years later.
Okay.
The real Ronald Reagan is very different than the one that
Right.
know.
Okay, so to
Far-right
drop
has
the
in
religion bit now and to get back to May 4th, 2016, another holiday, was a holiday for the present elections. Because the Democratic Party, by coincidence on May 4th, had some decisive decisions to make. And Cruz and Kasich cashed in their trips and said Trump is going to be the nominee.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
So the Republican
he won
debate
big
is
in
over.
Indiana,
Right.
and they both suspended their campaigns, and now, Trump is the presumptive nominee for the Republican Party.
Right. So anyway, I guess we've gotten the importance of May 4th, 2016 on the table. And Donald Trump won big. He was number one in the delegates. And the Republican and the New York Times and the NPR, and they all denounced Ronald Reagan and are saying that Hillary Clinton is going to be the nominee. They also want to wind this up pretty soon.
Yeah, and she basically is.
She's likely to win.
She's very likely to win.
But Bernie
it's not
Sanders-
over, and
Yeah.
Bernie's going to stay in
He's
it
gonna
through
stay
June
on.
14th. He's going to go in for every primary and give voters a chance to cast a ballot for him.
Okay, so I guess we're ready for another question now. What is the total delegate for the Trump presidency as of the 5th of May?
Right.
And as of the 10th of May?
Because he has not gotten the 1237 that he
Yeah,
needs
but he
yet,
has-
but
he
he's
has gained,
close, and
yeah.
everyone else has dropped out.
Right,
So
so-
what is the total now?
So in May 5th, Donald Trump had 1,053 delegates. And now, on May 9th, just on the eve of this thing, he has 1 million, no, not 1 million, 10,053 votes, delegates, 10,053, 1,053
delegates.
delegates on May 5th. And on May 9th, he has 1,068 delegates. So he picked up another 10 delegates
So he's,
in the
he's
last week.
closing in. He's
And there
less
were
than 200 delegates away.
1,237 delegates necessary for the Cleveland nomination. So Trump is closing in. But I think he shot himself in the foot because there's going to be no debate.
Well, yeah,
He just says to the Republicans, don't bother to vote. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, at this point, he's got no opposition, and so it's going to be a little bit harder for him to
Well, he can
stay
still
in the
give-
spotlight.
he-
Although it doesn't seem to be hard for him to stay in the
Well, he can
spotlight
make
at all.
TV. He can
Yeah.
make advertisement.
Yeah,
But for every advertisement he puts out, the New York Times and the Washington Post and the State Department puts out counter advertisements.
yeah,
So that's a debate that's going on inside Washington inside Council on Foreign Relations.
Oh, absolutely.
That's where he's going to have the problem behind
And
the
did you
scenes.
see The Economist came out with an editorial against
Yeah,
him?
what did it say?
Well, it basically it slammed him for being a protectionist, essentially.
Yeah.
And because obviously that's their big concern. That's why I read The Economist, is because I want to know what the ruling class is saying to each other at
Right.
dinner parties. And
Right,
reading
right.
The Economist is the best way to know what they're saying.
Right.
And it said that he's already done damage to the Republican brand.
Right.
Because he's waged his campaign on these ideas of being, a protectionist, and now that's going to be seen as a path forward for future Republican candidates, in such a way as that.
So who is the enemy according to Trump? Well, he's insulted blacks. He's insulted Hispanics. He's insulted the prime TV people. He's insulted the New York Times, the Washington Post. He's against these 4 or 5 establishments.
Yeah.
And the Republican National Committee.
Station break. We need to take a station break, and we will get into who is the enemy according to Donald Trump.
Yeah, well,
this is Athens Speakout 365.
Right.
I'm David DeWitt. My guest is Professor Robert Whaley, and we are talking about the Republican nomination for president.
Okay, so now we have 2 Donald Trumps. The old Donald Trump and the new Donald Trump. And the new Donald Trump,
So is the new Donald Trump really different from the
I
old
don't
one?
know, but he claims the new Donald Trump has a BA from University of Pennsylvania, and he knows how the economy works.
The new one claims this, yes.
That's what he claims.
Well, he claims that, and he said this week, though, in stark evidence against his claim, that we can just print money
Yeah.
to deal with the debt. And it seemed to me, I am not an economist, and I really did not enjoy my economic courses very much, but I did understand the basic principle that if you don't have something backing up the money and you just print it,
Yeah.
you're going to have an inflation crisis on your hands.
Well, okay, I agree with you on money. And this claim, the new Donald Trump, he hasn't convinced me of anything.
No, I don't. Yeah, he had the big foreign policy speech that it was fundamentally unserious. His proposal about the debt was fundamentally unserious.
Right.
I don't see this new Donald as being anything
Well,
more
when
than a media
Nixon,
creation.
when Nixon was president, he came out with the old Nixon and the new Nixon.
It's a tried and true tactic. This is like.
And the Democrats said, this was a Democratic joke. Will the new Nixon please stand up? I want to know the difference.
Right.
And that's what Hillary will say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who is the new Donald Trump? We haven't heard of him yet.
The only thing that's changed really to me is not that Donald Trump has changed at all. The media will act like he's pivoted. They'll say that he's pivoted. You'll hear that, oh, he's trying to win general election voters now. He's going to have a new attitude. But in practice, just watch closely. You're not going to see very much difference. Not really.
I don't see much difference. He has 2 major issues. He's going to take care of China, but he doesn't say how. Now, he hints he's going to raise the tariff. And that'll
Right.
bring industry back.
Well, he's
and all the economists
protectionist.
say he can't do it.
No, it doesn't work in reality.
And then the second issue is Mexico. He's going to build the wall against Mexico.
That they're going to pay for.
And how do they do that? Going to send the army down to Mexico? So his plans are imaginary, but how does it work?
In some ways, they're absurd, and in other ways, they're really. He's promised multiple times to commit war crimes.
Now, wait a minute. Say that a little closer now.
He's promised to commit war crimes.
Well, he hasn't said that.
Well, he hasn't put it in those words, but what he said he would do,
He says
he's promised.
He said
wants
something about torture. What did he say about torture?
Well, he wants to do a lot worse than waterboarding.
Ah, well,
is
that's
what he
torture.
said, which is waterboarding's torture. Doing a lot worse than that is a blatant violation of the Geneva Convention.
That's right.
There have been intelligence analysts who have speculated that U.S. Army personnel will have to ignore his commands lest they violate international law.
Yeah.
From what he's said.
Well.
He's promised to kill the families of terrorists. Now, he didn't say kill terrorists. He promised to kill their families. That's
How
a
does he
violation
do
of,
that?
Well, he could bomb them with drones if he wanted to do it in practice.
If he gets elected president,
yeah.
will the CIA carry out his orders?
Well, that's the big question, right? Like you are ordering the U.S. military to commit war crimes.
Yeah, well, all of this is promise.
Yeah, this is just what he said. But I mean, it's kind of scary that somebody's making promises to commit war crimes.
Well, we've had
Making promises to print
we've
money.
had George W. Bush,
We've had
who has
presidents.
performed worse.
Yeah.
He's actually carried out
We've
war.
had, and Henry Kissinger and
So
a variety of
could
others.
he do worse than George W. Bush?
I think he could.
He
because
could.
I think what scares me is with having someone like Donald Trump in the White House and having someone like Bibi Netanyahu in Israel, I think that we would be heading for ground war in the Middle East. I really believe that.
That's a danger. And I think that Donald Trump is dangerous. I would not vote for him.
Yeah. Well, me neither.
But let's go to another question.
Okay.
One of the persons who endorsed him was Ben Carson. Do you know anything about this speech on May 4th?
You know, I saw it here in our little summary, but I did not watch that speech and I didn't see the coverage. So what did Ben Carson say?
Ben Carson said that he's in charge of the search committee for Trump.
For a VP?
Yeah.
Okay.
But he himself does not want the vice president's
Well,
post.
that's interesting. Okay.
Now, why did Carson ever run? Who does he know in the Republican Party? I think that Ben Carson was a kind of a Clarence Thomas. He was a black face appealing to the Republicans.
Well, I think that was, he was a Tea Party guy. That's how he got famous. And
But he was also a medical doctor.
And a medical doctor, which lends him a little bit more credibility. And I think you're exactly right. I think it was a person for the Republicans to show up and say, like, hey, we don't hate black people, like some people presume.
Well, I think it's one of these...
Had unprecedented disrespect for a president in the last 7 years, and Carson is a
Now,
showcase
the real
for that.
problem with the black vote is that Hillary has got it.
Well, yeah, the problem for Republicans with the black vote is that black people are pretty savvy, and they know, who's trying to
And the head of the Black Caucus...
mess them up and who's trying to help them.
The head of the Black Caucus...
And putting Ben Carson's face on anything isn't going to make black people
gonna,
any less savvy.
That's not going to work. But the head of the Black Caucus, Bernie Sanders isn't getting those votes either. The head of the Black Caucus is a congressman from Columbia, South Carolina, by the name of James Clyburn.
Yeah, James Clyburn. He has a lot of power in the Congressional Black Caucus.
And he's behind Hillary because Hillary campaigned under Bill in 1963.
Yeah.
And went down to South Carolina.
And they have a long
Bill
political
gave blacks
relationship
jobs
and a history
in Arkansas, and when he got in the federal government, he gave blacks jobs.
That's the other thing about black voters en masse, especially in the South, where Clyburn has a lot of control. They're very
loyal to the old.
They're loyal and they're wary of. Even Barack Obama had to work pretty hard to convince them that he was electable before you really started seeing him get their support. So they're wary
still cool
about things like
Obama. Because Obama hasn't carried through with many of the promises.
Right. Yeah.
Lots of blacks
there's still
are
there's still a lot of
in other words,
unfulfilled expectations on the left.
Yeah, right.
A feeling of that toward Barack Obama.
Affordable health care is still a controversial.
Well, so you see lack of medical access. You still see a lot of systemic racism in the justice system.
Right.
You still see housing discrimination and education discrimination and some of those big issues. And I don't know if anyone thought that these were just going to be solved magically by having a black president, but I think some people thought we were going to make a little bit more progress than we have.
Right. Okay, so let's get up to another question. Question 4.
Okay.
What were the results of the Indiana primary?
And
May
this is the
4th.
one that took place last Tuesday.
Yeah, we're a little bit behind, but the Indiana primary is setting the tone for West Virginia.
Right, which is today.
Sanders got 52% of the vote, 44 delegates, And Clinton got 47% of the vote and 38 delegates, which shows that the Democratic race between Sanders and Hillary is more Democratic than the Republican race.
Yes.
Yeah, it shows it's
And
competitive.
actually, they are now making rules to make it even more Democratic. In 4 years, Maine was first here,
Right.
getting rid of the superdelegate
Right.
system,
Right.
and we're probably going to see a lot more of
Right.
that.
And then as a quick summary, we want to say something about Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. And we just summarized the delegates' votes. How did Hillary and Bernie do in those primaries that we didn't have time to really discuss in the past?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, Hillary won most of them through the black vote. There were plenty of blacks in Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. And Hillary won all of those states rather easily. And Bernie won one of them, Rhode Island.
Right.
There weren't too many blacks in Rhode Island. It was mostly whites, mostly Italian Americans. And Bernie got them. Bernie does well with the whites. And Connecticut was real close because the Connecticut electorate is very intelligent. And Hillary got 28 delegates and Sanders got 27 delegates. There was only one delegate apart. So it was a nip and
it's
tuck
still-
race.
yeah.
Right. So that brings that up to date. Okay, so maybe
So the
we
next
should.
question,
What time have we got?
we've got
Yeah,
another
plenty
15, 20 minutes.
15, 20 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we can raise another question. The next question is, tell us something about Hillary's concession speech on the 27th of April. What did she hold out to Bernie Sanders? It was a very generous speech.
Yeah,
What did she say?
she's trying to pivot toward. She wants to move on and make herself look.
She
you
wants
know,
to look. She wants
like
November.
she's the shoo-in,
Let's
yeah.
close it in.
Yeah,
What did
exactly.
she say exactly?
So she touched on a lot of things. What did you think was the olive branch to Bernie Sanders?
Well, he gave
specifically?
10 points. She gave about 10 points.
Mm-hmm.
We agree. We both want Social Security. We both want more pay, and we need more jobs. We both believe in Medicare. We both believe in Obama's Affordable Care Act. We both support Roe versus Wade on abortion. We're united against Trump. Okay. We believe in global warming, climate change.
Right.
Yeah. So
So that actually, I think that was savvy of her in a way, because that has been kind of lost in the primary, is that there is actually, on a policy level, a lot of overlap.
the difference is Hillary's a little vague on the taxes.
Of course. And she's, yeah, I mean, she's more vague. She's drug her feet to get into these
And
issues.
she's
you
not
know.
telling her where she gets. She's not telling us where she gets the money.
The campaign finance reform, the Wall Street,
Yeah.
foreign policy. There's
Right.
still big differences.
Right.
But on a lot of these key domestic issues, there is similarity.
Yeah, it was a good
between the
speech.
two.
It was a good speech. Anyway, Sanders had a reply. Specifically, I'm going to tax the top 0.1%. I'm going to get a transaction tax. And the second difference is that he claims that he can do better against Trump in November.
Though right now he polls better than Trump in November.
In the polls.
Yeah. Like she beats Trump by an average of about 6.5%. He beats Trump by an average of about 13%.
Okay.
So that's the difference in the polls. The counter argument to that goes, well, she has dealt with 25 years of the Republican attack machine and he hasn't. So if he were to become the nominee, you would all of a sudden start seeing all these cries of socialists, godless communists, you know, all these things from the Republican attack machine, and those poll numbers would come down and he wouldn't be beating Trump by quite so much. That's the argument that I've heard against Sanders' argument, that obviously he does poll better right now than Hillary against Trump. And I think that's true to some extent, but I actually do agree with him in general that I do think he doesn't have the negatives that she has. she has very high negatives, and I think that without those negatives, and considering as high of negatives as Trump has, Sanders probably would be a stronger general election candidate against Trump. I think.
I haven't heard of one scandal with Bernie Sanders, whereas I lost count on him.
Yeah. Even Trump has said, I mean, if Bernie was the general election candidate, he could point to Trump himself saying, oh, I like Bernie. You know? And say Trump couldn't call him Crooked Bernie.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Like he calls Hillary. So I do think that he would be probably a stronger candidate for the Democrats.
That's right. I summarize it this way. I would rather have an honest Jew than a crooked Christian.
Well, and he's the only, among those three, Trump, Hillary, and Sanders, he is the only one who polls in majorities as far as integrity and honesty goes.
That's right. That's right.
I don't, fair or not, the American people, by and large, do not see either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton as having integrity or honesty, and they do for Bernie Sanders.
Okay, how many minutes we got?
10?
Yeah, about 10.
Okay, we'll try and do 5 minutes on another article about socialism, and then we'll have 5 minutes to summarize the
Sounds good.
Projections, okay? So interrupt this a little bit shorter. But anyway, I read an article on the 24th of April, 2016, written by a professor of history at Eastern Michigan University. And he was supporting Sanders.
Uh-huh.
And he gives a statement about the history of socialism in America and the history of progressivism. And he opens this up with a provocative statement. He opens this up with criticizing the evangelical Christians. The evangelicals have made this statement: I never thought I would see a socialist on the Democratic ticket. Now, Walter Morse, who writes this article, comes up with another quote, tells the United States how the evangelicals are artless about politics, and that from 1776 to 1948, the connections between democracy, the spirit of democracy, and the progressives were very similar to democratic socialism.
Mm-hmm.
So what is democracy, he raises? And he brings in the name of Robert Follett. And Morse then quotes an evangelical who says that the evangelicals say that the United States is not a socialist country and it's not a capitalist country, and that we have to define socialism. And he quotes an Atlantic Monthly article about the connections between Debs and Eugene Debs and Robert La Follette. Yeah, and that Sanders is following the old Congressional Progressive Caucus, and the New Deal had a certain socialist element. Mm-hmm. So he gives in my opinion, a brilliant defense of Sanders' campaign speech.
Yes, it's not unprecedented.
Right, it's not unprecedented.
It's got a noble history in American politics, if often defeated. I mean, but
right, and that
noble.
And that Hillary Clinton, as a liberal Methodist, doesn't talk about the class conflict. And the class conflict is a reality in American history and in the history of every country in Europe.
And that's a good, and you could probably speak to this better than I could, but just my general conception of American history. I mean, you see, that's a good example of kind of the same type of battle that's been happening almost all along in American history.
Right.
You know, and
There's a difference between the rich and the poor.
There is. I mean, there is a ruling class, and then there's the rest of us.
That's right. There are guys who work for wages. There are guys who work for salaries. There are capitalists, and a capitalist, as defined by Marx, is somebody big enough to hire workers for a wage.
And probably one of the easiest ways to raise the ire of the ruling class is to even talk about the fact that it exists.
That's right.
And that's been true for a long time. That's been true since the days of Eugene Debs.
That's right.
It's been true since,
That's right. I heard a very funny show when we had a show. Who was the guy who came in at Nightline at night?
Ted Koppel.
Ted Koppel. I heard a very interesting show. Ted Koppel was interviewing somebody, and one of his guests started talking about class. And you know what Koppel said?
Oh.
You have just thrown a skunk in the living room. Question closed.
Right.
Oh, that was a big joke.
You can really go through.
You got about 5 minutes.
Okay,
I would recommend the reading of the Education of Henry Adams.
Right, he
to
was
get
in
a
the class.
handle on some of the class in the 19th century, and you can see how this issue has, it just keeps. It's the elephant in the room, or the skunk in the living room.
Yeah.
It really is. It is something that the ruling class never wants to address. And in America, we pretend that classes don't exist, or that it's somehow unfair to talk about class, or we call it class warfare pretty much only when the working classes demand something more for themselves.
Okay, so what are the projected
In West Virginia.
in West Virginia?
The latest polls I've seen is that Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are going to win West Virginia today. Is that what you've got?
Well, Trump is not even running.
Well, yeah, he's not.
He's
got no
100%
opponent.
of the delegates.
Yeah, he's got no
and
opponent.
he's telling the Republicans to stay home.
But
Come and listen to my TV advertisements.
Yeah.
I think.
And West Virginia is his strongest state too, and he's telling people.
I say that Trump has peaked too soon.
That may be. I hope you're right. But Bernie is winning in the polls going into West Virginia, correct?
Yeah,
I saw
Bernie
it
is
with
winning.
like a 6-point lead or something like that.
Yeah, well, there is a 6-point lead, but I have seen a bigger lead. It was 6-point last week. Mm-hmm. But the newest poll I read this morning was that gives Sanders a 15-point lead. Can you imagine that?
That would be wild.
And this is their argument, that 93% of the people in West Virginia are white.
Yeah.
And that it's the third highest per capita white population of any state.
Right.
And Bernie did well in the other white states, Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire. So according to that, there are few black delegates who are going to come out. Few black voters are going to vote for Hillary.
Yeah.
She's not going to do so well. Where did she draw from?
What's interesting about that is that Hillary Clinton was beating Barack Obama really solidly among blue-collar white voters.
Well, she had the coal vote. Yeah, she had the coal vote.
She's lost that since then.
But what she, too, is saying climate change. So both Hillary and Bernie has said these coal people are going to have to start making solar panels.
Yeah.
And
which
West
is part
Virginia
of
is
why
running out of coal. The seams are getting.
Yeah.
You're not going to have
But
any
it
jobs
doesn't-
anyway.
Yeah, it's still got to come to a boiling point, and I
Right.
think for West Virginia that point comes with Donald Trump, because he's the one who's really popular in West Virginia.
Now, there was another big, interesting interview on the 4th of May by Steve Inskip. Did you see that interview?
I didn't know.
He interviews he interviews Bernie. Mm-hmm. And this was rebroadcast on WSAZ-TV in the state of West Virginia. And they have a very good NPR network. Mm-hmm. You can hear NPR in every county in Virginia, in West Virginia. Because they have a channel which goes on simultaneously. In Huntington, Wheeling, Charleston, all of the towns. Okay. Now, in the state of Georgia, it's just the opposite. I drove through the state of Georgia. There's one station in the whole state. If you get near Savannah, you can hear it.
Right.
But outside on the road from Savannah to Atlanta, you can hear nothing.
That's unfortunate.
Well, anyway, this interview says that Sanders went down to McDowell County in West Virginia, and he discovered that half the people in McDowell County are living on poverty, and that McDowell County is coal country, and they have the lowest life expectancy of any place in the United States. 62 years is the average life expectancy in McDowell County. Now, contrast that with Fairfax, Virginia, 20 points ahead. You live to be 82 when you have good medical service.
Wow.
So that's why. 2 minutes, okay. Well, we'll stop here with this projection. We both predict a Sanders victory in West Virginia.
Yes,
Do you have
we do.
any comment on this?
Well, I think it
Disagree
makes
with my enthusiasm?
no. I agree. I think that Sanders will win West Virginia. I think it'll be a lot harder for the Democratic candidate to win West Virginia in the general election, but I don't think that West Virginia matters a ton in the general election anyway. The key states.
You say Hillary's the inevitable nominee.
I think she's got about 95 to 99% chance of being the Democratic nominee at this point.
Bernie is also worried about that, and he agrees that Hillary's ahead in the delegates. But if that's the case, he's going to go to the convention in Philadelphia, and he's
Do you
going
think
to.
he will?
This is his promise.
If she's ahead.
If he goes to the convention, his argument is, I'm going to go and look at the credentials committee, and I want to look at the platform committee.
Yeah.
And I'm going to check out this Debbie Schultz.
Wasserman Schultz,
Yeah.
yeah. And she's been a horrible leader of the Democratic Party through this whole process. I think that if Hillary Clinton has more delegates than Bernie Sanders at the end of the races in June, I don't expect Bernie to take it to the convention. If he does have the same amount of pledged delegates, then he might.
Well, he might
We'll
go to
see.
those committees.
We'll see.
Well, anyway, thank you for coming. And
Thank you for having me, Professor.
This is called a democracy, and we are pledging democracy. And a democracy is debate is the oxygen of democracy.
Thank you, Professor.